Welcome to a new episode from American Pulse. Today we have a very special guest, Judge Jeanine Beyro. Welcome to the show, Judge Jeanine. A lot of Egyptians are watching your clips circulating over Facebook, and they noticed that you've been very concerned about the Egyptian future and the presidential election and what's going on in Egypt. So before we go in details, would you like to give us a little bit brief summary about yourself and when did you start working on the media and the whole?
Okay. All right. You don't want me to go all the way back, do you?
Yeah.
You know, like prenatal care?
No. That's way too far.
Okay. All right. First of all, I'm delighted to be here. I'm happy that you're doing this. And I've been a prosecutor or judge and a DA for 32 years.
Westchester County, right?
Westchester County, and for those of you in Egypt who may not know where that is, it's right outside of New York City. It's a county of about 1 million people. And I started as a young lawyer and got very interested in the criminal justice system. And so most of my career has been about law and criminals. And just on the more positive side, I started the first domestic violence unit in the nation in the United States in 1978. My children will tell you that it was when the laws were written on stone tablets. It was so long ago. But I have been a fighter for the rights of women and children and the silent crime victim in this country. So from there, I became kind of a spokesperson for crime victims. I was always doing press conferences, and you know, the segue to the media was almost a natural thing for me when I made a decision that 32 years is really enough. I was the first woman Supreme Court judge in Westchester. I was the first woman DA. I was the first woman to try a murder case. I was the first woman president of the New York State DAs. And, it was a lot of great stuff, but I decided to take a turn, and I had a court show for which I won an Emmy, and which I thought was kind of a hoot. And then I went to work for Fox, and I work for the Fox News Channel, which is the most popular cable network in the United States. And it is a network where my boss, Roger Ailes, has given me the opportunity to talk about issues that, are passionate for me. And to just come right up to date, Egypt was one of those issues. And although I've run for office 5 times, and I know politics, and I know that politics is a blood sport, especially in New York, especially if you're the first woman for a particular office. But at the same time, what I see going on in Egypt, and the reason I started getting involved, was because I saw some similarities between what was going on in Egypt and the revolution that created this country. And so I have been very outspoken about Egypt and the Egyptian people.
I saw a couple of pictures on your Facebook page in Egypt. Have you been to Egypt recently?
I was in Egypt in April of this year, 2014, and I've been to Egypt twice before. I love the desert. I mean, I love the weather. I'm one of the few people who loves it. And I feel very passionate about the Middle East. I think that, Egypt, like Greece, it was the beginning of, so many things that we have, catapulted on, that we have used in society, whether it's the things that Egyptians have done in government or math or science, or, you go back to some of the history of what the Egyptians have done, and you worry, or at least I worried when I saw what was happening in Egypt after the June 30th revolution.
After or before?
Before, when I think it was, that's a very good question, and I'm very happy to answer it, because it wasn't until the Egyptian people came out and said, we are not going to tolerate this. When you have 30, 33, 35 million Egyptians, according to Google Earth, who come out and say, no more, you cannot suspend the Constitution, you cannot impose Sharia law, you cannot tell us that we all have to wear a veil, you cannot do X, Y, or Z. They surround the homes of the judges, then you say it's wrong. But, what Morsi was doing. And then the Americans were saying, but he was democratically elected. And my take was, yeah, so was Hitler.
Yes.
And for me, it was very clear that a democracy is when the people come out and say, no more.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough.
Yeah.
And so then I started, talking about Egypt, and then apparently my opening statement on Egypt went viral over there. They translated it in Arabic, and my mother, who was raised in Lebanon, but was born here, was very excited about that, and I was as well, only because I felt that it resonated over there, and that maybe I was onto something. So I ended up going to Egypt, and I was very critical before I went to Egypt of the Obama administration. When you have the United States government that was supporting Morsi, who clearly was ousted by those 35 million people, whether it's at the ballot box or in the streets, and America, of all places, should recognize, how we started and what we were about. And I liken the two. I liken what's going on in Egypt now to the beginning of democracy in the United States. I mean, there are patriots on both sides. Yes. And as a friend of mine, he became a friend after, Shafiq Gaber, talks about seeing Egypt in this East-West initiative through the Gaber Foundation, seeing Egypt through the eyes of the Egyptians. We Americans want you to do this and we want you to do that, but it's really more about what you need to do to get to whatever you perceive to be a democracy. And I was critical of Obama for not continuing to send the Apache helicopters, the Abrams tanks, the military support, and the monies that were promised.
Yeah, I think that some of those aids were released a couple of days ago from the American administration to the Egyptian government.
I understand that they were going to Fort Hood in the interim, during the interim government, and which may or may not be fine. But when you've got problems like Egypt had in the Sinai, and when you've got problems, where parts of Egypt were being promised to the Sudan, we had to help. We needed
immediate help at that time. Egypt always pictured America as the big sister country, and Egyptians never had a problem of having Americans over in Egypt. But do you think that view has changed over the years?
I really cannot. The image of Egypt by Americans, or the image of Americans by Egyptians? What do you mean?
Americans by Egyptians.
Yeah, I think that the Egyptians were disappointed. I know, I was there. I talked to ordinary people. I met with, the then Field Marshal El-Sisi. I met with the Minister of Tourism, the Minister of Intelligence, the generals, many of whom were trained at the Army War College in the United States, and were very proud of it. And I felt, and so many more people, but I felt that there was a great deal of disappointment. And my mission, after hearing that disappointment, was I wanted Americans to understand what Egypt does for us, okay? And this is a problem that Egypt has, because you haven't gotten that message out, and not critical, maybe you couldn't get it out. But does anybody really understand when Americans say, why do we send all of this money over there? They don't understand what we get in return. We get the flyover rights, okay, when we need it. We get, when we leave a country, the Egyptians come in and back us up with boots on the ground, or back that country up. What Americans don't understand is the priority rights that we get at the Suez Canal. I mean, make no mistake, that's huge. All of that is huge. So that if the Egyptians are willing to march with Americans and to back us up, shoulder to shoulder, if the Egyptians are giving us flyover rights, They're giving us priority at the Suez at no charge so that we don't have to go around.
Yeah.
Then, Americans need to know that. And Egypt is 1/4 of the Middle East, and as such, we need to keep our friends.
But don't you think that the American administration was scared that the interim government will take forever and no presidential election will ever happen, and then will be civil wars and...
Look,
I'm trying to play the devil advocate.
I know. And you know what? And what I want to say is, I don't know what was in the mind of our president. I don't. I can't predict what he was thinking, but this is what I can tell you. It was clear that the terrorist attacks that were taking place in the Sinai, all right, and the problem of, the promised areas of Egypt going to this country and that country, that Egypt was on its way to losing its nationality instead having an almost Islamic state, which is what we're seeing with ISIS right now.
Sure.
And I think that America, and I spoke to some people, and I said, look, why don't you support the interim government that is supported by 35 million Egyptians, okay? And they said, well, they don't have their constitution yet. I said, but here's the problem. Morsi suspended the Constitution, and not only did you send him the money then, after he was out, you wanted to send him the money. Okay? And I rest my case.
There's a question that is going on in the media. Why does Judge Jeanine hate terrorists?
It's like asking me why I hate criminals. I mean, I've devoted my life to it. In other words, it's not so much hate. It's like you and I don't care who you are. I don't care where you live.
Yeah.
You want to have a safe family, home life, the ability to feed them, the ability to proceed and pursue whatever dream you may have. I mean, it's the essence of America. The ability to have, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Do you think we're under risk or under potential of having more terrorist attacks here in America, being us ignoring what's going on in the Middle East?
All I know, and do I have intelligence over anyone else? The answer is no. But what I do know is that I think people should live and let live.
Yes.
And when there are people who are dedicated to killing us as Americans, I stand up as an American and I say that's wrong. If there are people who want to come here because they consider us to be the infidel, then I consider that a reverse crusade. I think that what's going on is they want to come here because we're the infidels. I mean, live and let live.
But that's not what they have been claiming the last few years. The terrorists and the Muslim Brotherhood and all these sections, they're trying to come close to America and wanted America to support them to gain democracy. So you think...
But America did support them. America supported the overthrow of Mubarak, who helped us get rid of Gaddafi in Libya, and we threw him under the bus for Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood. And it was the Egyptian people who said, we cannot tolerate this, not America.
There's a saying says that keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer.
Yeah.
Do you think that might be a strategy to avoid the harm of the terrorists? Would that work with the terrorists?
You still want to attribute the best of intentions to people, and I can't say, I can't answer what the motivations are.
Okay.
But I know that the Muslim...
Is it dangerous to bring them closer? That's what I'm trying to get to.
I think in the United States that there's a different feeling about the Muslim Brotherhood. I think that our administration feels that the Muslim Brotherhood hasn't hurt Americans, and they want to integrate them. And I think they need proof that they're here to hurt Americans before they do anything. And that's what America's all about. Free speech, free practice of religion, that kind of thing.
Now Egypt has a new president, President Sisi. How do you expect things going on forward for the Egyptian people?
What's interesting is I talk to people in Egypt, and I understand that the new president was a part of a cycling marathon.
Yes.
And I said, I love that. I mean, the Americans need to see this president, and we all have this perception, and I don't because I've been there, that, you know, everybody's running around on a camel in Egypt, and, you know, here you've got the president who's bicycling, he's in a marathon, and I loved it. I also like that he went to see one of the young girls who was injured.
She was raped.
She was raped, and I think that speaks volumes for, given the circumstances.
He felt guilty about it because that happened during the celebration of his becoming a president, so he felt very guilty about it, and he made the trip to the hospital, and his wife actually went the next day as well. So
well, and that's
very supportive.
I said, you know, I have hope for the Egyptian people, but here's the problem. You've got a country that its biggest industry, as I understand it, and I could be wrong, is tourism. And in order for Egypt to survive, you've got to have that GDP up to 10% for the next 10 years. And part of that is tourism, and people are not going to go to Egypt if they don't think it's safe. So I think that the president has a great deal on his plate. He has to convince the world that it is safe, that people like, who were the Koreans in the Sinai who were killed, and the president has to work on the economy. I mean, I understand that Amr Moussa is going to be involved in the new administration, who is someone who I believe may have run for president before, but is a businessman. And I think there's got to be more development, but most important is that so much of your country is under the age of 35. Is it 60%? Something like that.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's like 55% or more.
Yeah, and you know, give or take. And you know, everyone wants to work. And there's a lot on his plate. He's got to really deliver, and I wish him well.
Do you think it's easy for him to work under pressure from other countries and neighbors, and all these problems happen in the Middle East, or does he need American help?
Well, I don't think there's any question that he needs American help, but I also think there are other places that will help him. And I think that America has to be smart about recognizing that Egypt is in a fight for survival right now. You've got 90 million people. Every 9 months, another million people are born. And, you know, Egypt is going to do, and I think El-Sisi is not only a smart man, I think that he is a reluctant politician. And by that I mean, I don't get the sense that, you know, what a lot of the media says here, that he was a man who said, you know what, let's go overthrow Morsi, I want to be president.
No.
And what Americans don't understand about Egypt is that the Egyptian people from the time of the Pharaoh have a connection to the military and to the protectors. In America, there's something like only 1% of Americans have someone who is presently in the military. So we are suspect and cynical, and yet the Egyptian people have an affinity and a connection. And I think that he is a man who understands chain of command. He understands and makes hard choices, and I think that he might be a great leader. He is a young leader right now, and I think that every move he makes will be looked at carefully. And unfortunately, with the sentencing today of the journalist, I think that again there's going to be a lot of skepticism and cynicism by Americans who don't understand your justice system.
The thing is, I don't think the CC has anything to do with what happened today. I mean, it's a court system, and there's appeals, and you know, there's more evidence has to be shown. But we'll talk about it more after we come back on this break.
One that will have a huge impact, not only on the Middle East, including the state of Israel, but on every man, woman, and child in the United States. It all started when one of my opening statements went viral in Egypt. I called out President Obama for continuing to support Muslim brother President Morsi after more than 33 million Egyptians came out of their homes to protest this so-called democratically elected president. The problem? He suspends the Constitution, imposes Sharia law, puts himself above any checks and balances, creating a theocratic government like the Ayatollah in Iran, and he issues a presidential order releasing condemned terrorists from prison. On my recent visit to Egypt, I met with many government leaders and ordinary Egyptians who were very disappointed in the recent breakdown of U.S.-Egyptian relations. Those relations have been mutually beneficial for decades, from the Camp David peace accords, where Egypt was the first Arab country to recognize the State of Israel. It's the Obama administration's feckless foreign policy, the dithering and the doublespeak, and the refusal to support and ally Egypt in this dangerous time that creates the type of vacuum that allows terrorists to move in. Those terrorists, now present in Libya, continue to train and prepare for more attacks on the West. Now, Egypt has always given us flyover rights over their country and preferential treatment at the Suez Canal. After 9/11, Egypt shared intelligence and jointly interviewed al-Qaeda prisoners. But most important, Egypt, at the crossroads of Asia, Africa, and the Mediterranean, is geopolitically positioned to provide stability in the Middle East. Yet Obama refuses to give the military support promised and allocated for Egypt to fight al-Qaeda and the terrorists who threaten to destroy that country. Something in return. It's called consideration. Example, you have a house for sale. I give you money, you give me the house. Apparently, President Obama was playing golf when they taught that class in law school. Hello and welcome to Justice. I'm Judge Jeanine Biro. Thanks for being with us tonight. Do you remember right after he was elected, President Obama ran to Cairo to give his first foreign policy speech where he proclaimed that he wanted to seek common ground with the Muslim world, that his was a new presidency, and that he was no George Bush.
There must be a sustained effort to listen to each other, to learn from each other, to respect one another, and to seek common ground. As the Holy Quran tells us, be conscious of God and speak always the truth.
Mr. President, with all due respect, I have news for you. George Bush was more popular in the Arab world than you are right now. The truth? Your indecisive, unclear, and feckless foreign policy has literally run our relationship with that region into the ground. And here's the rub. You've been giving billions of our dollars to countries who not only give us nothing in return, but who literally hate our guts.
Welcome back. We will continue talking to Judge Jeanine Biro. Judge Jeanine, how do you picture the future of Egypt with whatever going on right now?
Well, I mean, the one thing that I hope for is that the Egyptian people will continue to rally behind their president, and knowing that there is no leader who can always please everyone all the time.
Almost impossible.
I would think it is impossible. And I worry about Egypt. I worry about the Egyptian people. I worry about the fact that there is so much at stake right now. I worry about the stability in the Middle East. But what I do know is that we need a stable Egypt in order to have a stable Middle East.
So we have to focus on that first, make sure Egypt is stable enough.
Right, and people have to eat. The economy is not in great shape there.
And what is it about Egypt? It's like a mysterious country. Like everybody says, in order for the Middle East to be stable, Egypt has to be stable.
Well, I think it's because Egypt is so big. It's a quarter of the Middle East. I think it's because Americans are accustomed and connected with Egypt, whether it's, the Sphinx behind you there or the pyramids. I mean, you know how many Americans I know who run around wearing the cartouches, and you know, Americans have connected with the Egyptians.
Yes.
And, you know, you don't see a lot of people going to, you know, Iraq or Iran the way people, you know, come to Egypt. There's a comfort zone there.
Mm-hmm.
And it is essential for the Egyptian people that that be continued, because it helps the economy, it helps in terms of the connection and the perception that we have of each other. And I think that Egypt has an influence over the rest of the Middle East. Look, Egypt in, what was it, the 73 Accord,
yes,
the peace accord. I mean, Egypt was the first country to recognize Israel.
Mm-hmm.
The United States is connected to Israel. And we need Egypt in the Middle East to continue that accord with Israel so that that stability continues. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why Egypt is very important. And the Egyptian people are not extremists.
We're not.
I mean, no, what you did on June 30th of last year is proof positive,
yes,
that you're not.
And that's why I wanted to make sure that people know that, you know, I'm Coptic Christian by birth, and I have a lot of Muslim friends, and Muslim people. There are a lot of conservative Muslim people that cause no harm or damage to anybody, and I want to make sure that, you know, people know that we're not, you know, you're not against Muslim people in general, or we're not against the region because of Islam. It's just because, you know, we're against the terrorists.
Look, you make a very good point, and that is this: a lot of Americans do not understand that because you're Muslim doesn't mean that you're an extremist. All right?
Yep.
That Egypt is 80% Muslim,
mm-hmm,
all right? And, you know, what we're talking about are the extremists, the people who are the fanatics, the people who are the terrorists. And I don't know of anybody who thinks that, you know, a terrorist is a great guy. I mean, I don't think anyone in this room would think.
I hope not.
I just, you asked the question at the end of the segment. I mean, but we have an obligation to help a country that is a moderate country that wants nothing more than to survive. And it broke my heart when when I was reading about the Coptic churches that were being burned down. And then, you know, when I was there, I talked to, and I forget his name, he was a pastor who said that the injured Christians were being helped in some of the mosques by the Muslims.
Yes.
And they recognize the importance of being together.
Well, I think the main thing that, you know, the previous regime of Morsi has achieved, and the biggest thing, is that he united all Egyptians together. Before him, it was, you know, there's like conflicts between Christians and Muslims, but now everybody realized that the seriousness of the situation, like we have to unite against terrorism. And
it's not just terrorism. The Egyptians that I know, and I know many in this country, are very proud of their heritage. They have a lot to be proud of. They have a lot to be proud of in terms of their history and what Egypt has taught the world over, you know, centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when you talk about some of the terrorists, they want to break down Egypt as a country, as a nationality, and just create an Islamic religious state. And the Egyptians don't want that, because the Egyptians are proud, as well they should be, of their nationality.
Yeah.
And if we as Americans can't relate to that, I don't know who can. So I am very supportive of Egypt, and I have to tell you, they stood up to terrorism in a way that I've never seen any other country in history.
Well, there's a saying that Egyptians are fighting terrorism for the whole world.
Yes, and they showed us how to do it. They said enough is enough.
Enough is enough. What's your advice to the government? What should they do?
Look, I've been a prosecutor and a judge, but I wish them well. I wish them peace as they go through the hard decisions, but I'm in no position to tell them what to do. But I wish for the Egyptian people some stability. I would love to see tourism back to where it was. I met some great people in Egypt, and I want to be able to go back and see them, you know, a little more comfortable with who they are. And I met a lot of women in Egypt who, you know, there are domestic violence laws in Egypt. I met women judges in Egypt. there's a lot that we can relate to as Americans, and we just need to kind of connect a little more.
As an Egyptian-born American resident and citizen myself, I'm very loyal to my home country, and I'm very thankful for America that gave me the chance to, to practice my profession, work and, prosper. So what's your advice to the Egyptians who are living in America to try to facilitate and bring back the relationship to the normal track?
One of the problems is that, I imagine maybe in most places in the world, people are, they remember breakfast, and that's about the end of it. That's how their memories go back to the start. But at the same time, I think it's important for Egyptians in the United States to talk about how they abhor violence, because sometimes the broad brush approach that we all take, because we're not as informed as we might be, says, well, you really, unless you say something, you must be in favor of it. And I remember as a sitting DA, as a district attorney, right after 9/11, and I was in New York City on 9/11, okay? I was literally, I saw the smoke from the first plane, and then, of course, the second. And I saw that a lot of Egyptians, a lot of Arabs became the victims of hate crimes. And I was, I believe, president of the New York State DAs then, and I had worked with the cardinal in getting the law passed, and I enforced that law against anyone who violated or harassed or, created any kind of violence against someone from the Middle East. But I think that what some Americans wanted to hear from people in the Middle East was how they abhor violence too. Now, it may be that they were frightened, I don't know. But I think that that's what Americans want to hear. They want to hear that we're not part of this.
Yes.
And I think that would be important, and I think it would help move things along.
How do we promote peace in the world? I mean, things have been crazy over the last few years.
If I had the answer to that, I don't know where I'd be, but, I think it's important for us to talk. I think
communication.
I think things like Shafiq Aber's East-West Initiative, that foundation. I mean, I spoke to those people from Egypt and the United States who were coming together, the best of the best, the brightest of the bright, working on projects that will continue after they have met and investigated and visited each other's countries. I think we need to do more of that. I think we need to dialogue, and it sounds so silly sometimes, but this is now an age of global communication, and the global dialogue through the internet, through your television show, through YouTube and all that is important. We all want the same things, and we've got to educate ourselves a little more as to what other countries may do in this situation, because their culture is different than ours. We can't expect everybody to be just like we want them to be.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure it's hard, but I think part of the humanity that, people need to understand that over the years, wars just were destructive. Nobody benefited from wars. People died for no reason, for religious differences, for race differences, for so many things. I mean, isn't it time to understand that, live and let live?
From your lips to God's ears. Let's just hope that that's the case.
All right. Thank you very much, Judge Jeanine, for being in our show today. It was a privilege to have you, and always a pleasure to see you again.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.